Under pressure from the Biden administration, Israel is beginning to take U.S. pressure into consideration when making tactical decisions on the ground in the battles in Gaza. And all this for Palestinian people who want what? Genocide. We'll talk about all this in detail coming up now on In Focus. Disturbing reports are beginning to pile up that the Biden administration's pressure on Israel is beginning to inform decision-making by commanders on the ground in a way that threatens both the operation itself and the lives of IDF soldiers. For instance, yesterday, Yediot Ahronot's military affairs reporter Yossi Yehoshua reported that in the IDF's operation in Jabalia, northern Gaza, the IDF used less than the force required in order to ensure the success of the mission out of an undue concern for civilian casualties. We should note that the civilians in Jabalia have been told to leave, to evacuate the area for several weeks now. So the civilians that remain in place today are civilians that have refused IDF direction to leave. All the same, the claims made by commanders on the ground are that the IDF used less than required force at the outset of its operation in Jabalia in a manner that endangered IDF soldiers because it was bowing to U.S. pressure to curtail or to limit civilian casualties, and that was becoming an overriding concern. Similar report by Amir Buchbut from Maariv yesterday reported that in the humanitarian corridors that civilians in Gaza are using to leave combat zones, a lot of the people coming in are military-aged and suspected terrorists from Hamas, and they're escaping through these humanitarian corridors to fight another day. And here, too, Buchbut's claim, based on statements by commanders on the ground, are that the IDF forces along the humanitarian corridor are not taking action against these suspected terrorists out of fear of harming the civilians that are also fleeing the combat zones. In other words, here too, Israel seems to be preferring the lives of civilians to the operational success of IDF forces in Gaza, again, under U.S. pressure. Also, here in JNS last week, Khaled Abu Tuame said in Our Middle East that there are reports that hostages were removed by Hamas terrorists from Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, and are now continuing to be hidden from the IDF by Hamas, and that they were spirited out of Shifa Hospital, again, through this humanitarian corridor that Israel is operating under duress from the United States government. There seemed to be some indication in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's press conference yesterday that indeed U.S. pressure is informing IDF operational decision-making. In fact, it was more than an indication. Prime Minister Netanyahu spent the majority of his remarks at the press conference, his prepared remarks at the press conference last night regarding the diplomatic climate that is accompanying Israel's ground operation in the Gaza Strip against Hamas. And he said that it's a tribute to the success of Israel's diplomatic efforts that Israel continues to enjoy the support of Western governments for its continued operation in the Gaza Strip, but that the U.S. government, the Biden administration, is facing pressure from pro-Palestinian actors in the United States to abandon its support for Israel, and that responding to this pressure that the Biden administration is under from these pro-Hamas elements inside of the United States, Israel agreed to a U.S. request to allow fuel to enter Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu assured the Israeli people that the fuel trucks that are entering Gaza are being used only in order to operate water pipes in South Gaza in order to prevent plagues, infectious diseases from running rampant in the areas that the evacuees from northern Gaza are now staying during the battles, but all the same, that fuel would not be coming into Gaza, and there would not be a fear and a real concern that the fuel, like everything else, is being diverted by Hamas to serve its interests in fighting and maintaining its fight against Israel. We know that hostage negotiations are in full swing, although Prime Minister Netanyahu denied that there's any deal for hostages that is on the cusp of being concluded. All the same, we know that the United States itself is applying massive pressure on Israel to agree to a prolonged ceasefire that will only help Hamas to regroup under the headline of hostage deal. And we have to bear these in mind as well, because anything that undermines the success of this operation, of course, is a catastrophic setback for Israel, because this is a war that we must win. Hamas must be eliminated, and we know this because we saw what it does when it is in power. We saw it on October 7th in this genocidal assault, the slaughter of our people carried out by Hamas, and again by several thousand Gazans who joined them as well. One of the things that's most disturbing really is that the Biden administration now is escalating its assaults on Israeli Jews in Judea and Samaria, what they call the settlers or settler violence. And we see that perhaps under pressure, perhaps due to the fact that there are people with a record of supporting Hamas in key positions in the U.S. government, in the National Security Council, the Director of Intelligence, Maher Bitar. It was one of the leaders of the pro-Hamas BDS campaign at Georgetown University when he was a student there, and now he's in charge of the information flow inside of the National Security Council. So he decides what information President Biden is going to see every morning. And we also know that Hadi Amar, who's the special representative to the Palestinians in the State Department, also has a long record of supporting engagement with Hamas, views of Hamas as a legitimate actor that should be treated as such by the U.S. government, etc. And they're the ones they're the key officials who control both the flow of information and also direct a large amount of U.S. policy in relation to Israel and the Palestinians. So with this in mind, and of course bearing in mind that Democratic voters or the pro-Hamas elements of U.S. societies overwhelmingly vote for the Democratic Party and now threatening not to vote for Biden and other Democrats in the 2024 election, we have to pay attention to some statements, actions, and an op-ed that President Biden published yesterday, Saturday, in the Washington Post in relation to the rising intensity of the tone and the assaults of the Biden administration on Jews in Judea and Samaria. One of the things that Prime Minister said in his opening remarks at yesterday's press conference was that when he was placing the U.S. pressure on Israel in context and the required and the decision by the government to bow to U.S. pressure and allow fuel into Gaza, even though this endangers the operation because it can be diverted and in many, many cases has been diverted to Hamas, is that Israel is receiving military resupply from the United States. We've spoken about this in the past, that the Air Force is completely dependent on U.S. Produced bombs in order to maintain its air operations over Gaza and Lebanon. So we are dependent on U.S. military aid in order to prosecute this war. This is something that the United States, of course, has cultivated in Israel, this increased dependence over the years, so that it's not that the United States is doing us a favor per se. It is that the United States doesn't want Israel to have independent capabilities to develop, to build and produce our own bombs for our Air Force and shells for our artillery and tanks. So this is something the United States has cultivated over the decades, and it is something that Israel is now facing now. So the United States is resupplying Israel with these bombs, but as a result, Israel is undermining its own war efforts in order to appease Biden. And so Biden said in a Washington Post op-ed that was published over the weekend, he said he pointed a finger again at the Jews in Judea and Samaria, who he keeps insisting, along with Secretary of State Blinken, are a major threat to stability and peace in the Middle East. And among other things, Biden wrote in this op-ed that the United States is prepared to take our own steps, including issuing visa bans against extremists attacking civilians in the West Bank. That's not extremist Palestinians attacking Jews, which has increased by 300% over the past several months, but rather Jews attacking Palestinians, alleged attacks by Jews attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. And he then followed that op-ed that he published in the Washington Post with a memo that he sent to Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Secretary of Treasury Janet Yellen. And it directed top officials. I'm just reading from a write-up of this memo that was published in Politico. It says he directed top officials to prepare visa bans and sanctions for extremist Israeli settlers attacking and displacing Palestinians in the West Bank. The cabinet memo sent to senior aides like Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Treasurer, ordered their agencies, quote, to develop policy options for expeditious action against those responsible for the conduct of violence in the West Bank. The targets for reprimands, and that's the end of quote. The targets for reprimands are broadly defined in the memo. They include people or entities that have, quote, directly or indirectly engaged in actions or policies that threaten the security or stability of the West Bank, take actions that intimidate civilians in the West Bank with the purpose or effect of forcing displacement actions in the West Bank, or make moves that constitute human rights abuses or violations, and actions, most importantly, and actions that significantly obstruct, disrupt, or prevent efforts to achieve a two-state solution. So this isn't just violence. This is anything that the White House claims, the White House that's informed by the intelligence flow it receives from Hamas supporter Maher Bitan and by the special envoy to the Palestinians with a long record of supporting Hamas, Hadi Amar, right? They get to decide what actions may significantly obstruct, disrupt, or prevent efforts to achieve a two-state solution. So anything that undermines the Biden administration's effort to rid Judea and Samaria of Jews, Israeli Jews, military or civilian presence, that, of course, would disrupt or prevent efforts to achieve a two-state solution. So this is a memo essentially criminalizing Israeli presence in Judea and Samaria. The memo states that President Biden sees the settler violence as a serious threat to peace among Israelis and Palestinians and destabilizing throughout the Middle East. Okay, so that's the Biden administration's policy. And the threat that allegedly is posed by settlers is based on a report that the Politico report cited by Yesh Din, which is a radical anti-Zionist organization registered in Israel that's funded by anti-Israel foundations in the United States and by EU governments. So it's also, by the way, informed by similar reports by B'Tselem, which is also funded by the same organizations and foreign governments. So a couple of things on this. I spoke with Naomi Khan, who's been a guest on the show in the past and is the spokesman for the Regavim organization, which is an Israeli NGO that very, very carefully follows the data on Palestinian attacks on Jews on the one hand and allegations of Jewish assaults on Palestinians on the other. So the first thing to bear in mind is that according to the IDF's own data, the number of violent clashes between Israeli civilians in Judea and Samaria and Palestine and Palestinians, in October 2023 versus October 2022 was down 50%. So there's a 50% reduction actually in the amount of intra-civilian violence relating to Jews and Arabs in Judea and Samaria over the same period last year. So that's first of all. So it's a lie that there's been an escalating level of violence by Jewish civilians against Palestinians, or for that matter, by civilians on the Palestinian side against Israeli Jews. It's simply not true. It's been reduced by 50%. There has been an increase in clashes between the IDF and Palestinian terrorists. And the data that the United States is citing based on these reports by these anti-Israel foreign-funded groups operating in Judea and Samaria, they actually include IDF, Palestinian terrorists killed in IDF counter-terror raids that are ongoing in Judea and Samaria as casualties killed by Israeli civilians. So B'Tselem, Yesh Din, and other international organizations that are cited by the U.S. government, or that the U.S. government is basing their anti-Israel policies on, actually use data related to IDF counter-terror operations in Judea and Samaria. They distort the information, and they claim that the casualties on the Palestinian side, all of whom, by the way, are terrorists, are actually civilians, and that they're killed not by IDF forces in counter-terror operations, but rather by Israeli civilians. None of this is true. It's a complete falsehood. All the same, this is what the Biden administration is basing their memo on, that's directing the State Department and the Treasury Department to sanction Israeli citizens who these organizations and these pro-Hamas U.S. officials are claiming are taking actions that significantly obstruct, disrupt, or prevent efforts to achieve a two-state solution. So that can be anybody. That could be me, right? That could be anybody who's saying, look, I don't want a Palestinian state. And by the way, and also, one of the people that I've criticized repeatedly on this show is the commander of Central Command, Major General Yehuda Fuchs, who I have shown has been hiding the central role that the Palestinian Authority is playing in the ongoing terrorism inside of Judea and Samaria, and placing all the blame for this terrorism on Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and other groups that aren't favored by the State Department, and I find that deeply troubling. But Yehuda Fuchs himself said last week, he gave a statement and said that 99.9% of the so-called hilltop youth, that's the sort of more militaristic or militant, more to the point, Jewish Israeli youth that live in ranches and other sort of outposts of Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria are nonviolent. That is, 99.9% of these people that the Biden administration insists are actually at the core of the violence in Judea and Samaria do not engage in violence at all. So this is not a man who can be accused of any sort of pro-settler leanings, not. But here he is proclaiming the honest truth, which is that there is no significant or any violence actually emanating from Israeli civilians inside of Judea and Samaria. The Biden administration is pushing this idea along with their single-minded insistence that Israel not take control, not maintain its control over Gaza after the war, not take any of the land in Gaza, not annex any sort of border zone, buffer zone between southern Israel and the Gaza Strip after the war, which of course would lead to a sense of defeat on the part of the Palestinians, and in fact that it should not even have a maritime blockade of the Gaza coastline after the war. Everything should be allowed to be loosey-goosey, and the Palestinian Authority that's playing such a major role in terrorism. And as Prime Minister Netanyahu also noted last night, 43 days after the October 7th slaughter, PA leader Mahmoud Abbas and all of his people have continued to refuse to condemn what Hamas did to Israel. And here, I want to cite data that I spoke about, or I wrote about at length in a column that came out this morning in JNS called "What do the Palestinians Want?" Last Thursday, Birzeit University by Ramallah, which is an absolutely pro-Hamas, pro-terror, anti-Israel university, they released the data of a survey of Palestinian public opinion that they took the last week of October among Palestinians in Judea and Samaria on the one hand, and in Gaza on the other. Their poll of Palestinians in Gaza included people from the north who were evacuated to the south and residents of the South Gaza Strip. So it included the entire population of Gaza, representative sample, and also of Judea and Samaria. This survey was based on face-to-face interviews. that the researchers from Birzeit University conducted with the Palestinians who responded to the survey. So this is a statistically significant sample and an authentic reflection of where the Palestinians stand. And just to make clear what the stakes are, I want to just point out another aspect of what Biden said in his op-ed in the Washington Post, which has been parroted and expanded upon by Secretary of State Blinken in a series of statements that he's made in recent years. So President Biden wrote, "As we strive for peace, Gaza and the West Bank should be reunited under a single governance structure, ultimately under a revitalized Palestinian Authority as we work towards a two-state solution." He added that there must be no forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza, no reoccupation, no siege or blockade, and no reduction in territory. In other words, Israel is not allowed to take any action that would cause the Palestinians to have a sense of defeat following what they did in October, on October 7th. And all of this is guided by the Biden administration's operating principle that the Palestinians do not support Hamas, that Hamas does not represent the Palestinians, and that as a result, the defeat of Hamas should not come at the expense of the Palestinians who are actually victims of Hamas. So the Biden administration says this is the Biden administration's policy. They're making a moral equivalence between Israeli civilians in Judea and Samaria and the Hamas terrorists who carried out the slaughter of October 7th, and they're insisting that the Palestinians do not identify with Hamas. Okay, so now we're back at the Birzeit University survey of Palestinian public opinion that was taken the last week of October. And I think, as I wrote in my article, the numbers don't lie. I mean, just as the slaughter itself was an act that displayed the utter sadism, barbarism, jihadism of Palestinian society, of Hamas in general. So the numbers also are about as subtle as a brick in terms of where the Palestinians stand on the issues that are most significant today. So October 7th, what do the Palestinians think of October 7th? This is a pretty good measuring rod of where they stand on, say, genocide. So it works out that 75% Palestinians support the slaughter of October 7th. 10% of them, or 11% of them, can't decide whether they support it or oppose it. It's just not clear to them. They may support beheading babies. They may not. They may support the butchery of and mutilation and gang rape, brutal gang rape of Israeli women, and mutilation of organs, sexual organs of men who fell victim to these people on October 7th. They may support it. They can't decide, but 75% of Palestinians definitely support it. And as to the allegation that the Palestinians don't really know what happened, you have to look at the Telegram pages of the Palestinian Authority, of villages and towns in Judea and Samaria, individual accounts of web celebrities on Instagram, Telegram accounts among Palestinians who live in Judea and Samaria, and you see that they are passing around gleefully some of the most brutal footage of what occurred on October 7th. So they're fully cognizant of what happened, and 3/4 of Palestinians think it's fantastic. Another 11% can't decide whether they're for or against it. And the rest of them are to varying degrees opposing. So the overwhelming majority of Palestinians, 86%, either support it or are sitting on the fence. Another 14%, varying degrees of opposition, but 75% support is very, very important. And what about the annihilation of Israel? Can they support a two-state solution? Is that what they want? The Americans insist that what they want is a two-state solution. That's just like what the Americans want, right? And, just as the Americans want to go against any Palestinian that doesn't support, any Jew that doesn't support a two-state solution, deny them visas, deny them, place sanctions on them. So too, you'd assume that they'd want to do that for the Palestinians. Well, if they did, they wouldn't have the same policy, because it works out that the Birzeit survey showed that 75% of Palestinians support the absolute annihilation of Israel, otherwise known as a Palestine from the river to the sea. So they want to annihilate Israel. That's 75% of Palestinians. And, Rashida Tlaib says, oh, no, Palestine, free Palestine from the river to the sea. That doesn't mean Israel's annihilation. It means the establishment of a one-state solution where Jews and Arabs have equal rights. So, no, they were asked about that. The Palestinians were asked, well, do you want a one-state Jewish-Arab state, or do you want to annihilate Israel? And so, like I said, 75% want to annihilate Israel. Only 5.4% said that they want a Jewish-Arab state. And the rest of them said they wanted a two-state solution. So we're talking about, they want about 17% of them want a two-state solution. So less than 1 in 5 Palestinians want the two-state solution that the United States wants so badly that they want to place sanctions on Israeli Jews who do anything to undermine it. Okay, but less than 1 in 5, 17% of them. They're also deeply anti-Semitic. So this comes out in a lot of the different responses to the Birzeit survey. And I think one of the more telling ones was they were asked, what do you think that Western support for Israel is based on? So 92% of Palestinians said it was because of the Jewish lobby. So, this nefarious concept of sort of a council of elders that are the elders of Zion, right? That are twirling their mustaches and dictating U.S. foreign policy because they control everything. So that's 92% of the Palestinians blame this conspiracy theory, this Jewish lobby. And 96% of Palestinians say it's because of Jewish money. It's economic interest, they say. So you're talking about a deeply, deeply hateful society that seeks the genocide of the Jews of Israel, the utter annihilation of the Jews of Israel. And why do they want to do this? I mean, so this answer was, you can kind of glean it from a question that they asked, which was, why do you think that Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th? So there were most of the answers, most of the choices that were given in this multiple choice question got less than 1% to 3%. But the three answers that got significant support were, one was 21% said that it was to break the siege of Gaza. 29% said that it was to liberate Palestine. And the plurality of Palestinians responded to the question of why did Hamas take this action? Why did they conduct the slaughter of innocent Israelis on October 7th was jihad. They said it was to respond to violations of Al-Aqsa, which is just sort of a code for jihad. Al-Aqsa being under threat, that's a jihadist concept that was coined by the heads of Hamas and by Yasser Arafat. And every time that they were promoting jihadist assault against Israel in the name of Islam, they would say that Al-Aqsa is in danger. Mahmoud Abbas, the PA chairman today, has said it repeatedly, talks about Jews defiling Al-Aqsa with their filthy feet and other things. So that this, and Hamas, of course, does it as a matter of course. So jihad, the plurality of Palestinians said that the slaughter was conducted because of jihad. And here it's worth noting, right, that the places that Hamas and the thousands of Gazan civilians that came along for the ride actually attacked and conducted their slaughter and rape and mutilation, etc., in were not religious areas. I mean, these were highly secular left-wing kibbutzim that were assaulted. The Peace Festival, which was being carried out on Saturday, on Shabbat, the day of the attack, which is also Simchat Torah, High Holy Day, overwhelmingly not religious. So they were attacking secular Israeli Jews under the banner of jihad, because jihad doesn't distinguish between settlers who have long beards and are shepherds tending to their sheep in Samaria, and kibbutznikim that volunteered to bring Gazans for medical care at Birzeit Hospital in Israel because they want to promote peace. They don't make any. There's no distinguishing between the anybody along the spectrum of Jews in Israel for the jihad And the plurality of Palestinians think that it's because of jihad that it was attacked, and 75% of Palestinians support it. So all of this shows that the Biden administration's policy that's trying to curtail IDF operations, prevent the Palestinians from paying any price for their slaughter on October 7th by claiming that it was undertaken by Hamas, which isn't supported by the Palestinians. And what the Palestinians need is hope and a state that they'll get a state of their own at the end of the day. So Israel is not allowed to protect itself and block Hamas or any successor organization from taking charge of Gaza and threatening Israel again. No, Israel is not allowed to take any of those actions to defend itself. Israel has to curtail its operations in Gaza and place their forces in unnecessary peril because the United States is insisting that we limit civilian death among people who are standing with Hamas fighters and may very well be Hamas fighters in civilian clothes in places like Jabalia, Beit Hanun, Gaza City, Khan Yunis in the south, Rafiah in the south, and other places. So what we see is this portrait of the Palestinians that the Palestinians themselves just published, Birzeit University, saying that they are a genocidal society. What they are is genocidal. Who they are genocidal. What they want is genocide. That's what they seek. So how do you change a society like that if all you do is report them? Well, you don't. What you do is you place Israel in existential jeopardy. That's what you do, is you're empowering them. So the only way that you can actually mitigate, cool down their jihadist fervor, their genocidal aspirations, is by making it clear to them that if they continue this way, that they will be severely punished, that they are being severely punished, and they will continue to be severely punished. Jihadist concept of war with infidels doesn't allow ever for peace. What it allows for is a temporary ceasefire, otherwise known as a hudna. Now, this ceasefire, a hudna, can last for up to a decade, and it can, be reinstated, but each time for up to a decade. And the reason why jihadists would agree to a hudna is because they're too weak to attack the infidels. And the concept of jihad says that the minute that we're strong enough, we're going to reinstate our attacks. It can be at the end of 10 years. It can be in the middle of 10 years. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that if the infidel is stronger than you are and you can't beat them, then you go into hudna mode. And under the circumstance, given the way that the Palestinians define themselves as a people, as sort of a negative image of Israel that exists in order to annihilate Israel, all that Israel can aspire to is a hudna. And the only way that we can get one and make it continuous is to keep them down, is to punish them, not to ever reward them, to make clear to them the price that they will pay by exacting a price. For instance, annexing parts of Gaza to Israel as a buffer zone, 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers from north to south, and then from east to west as well, and taking over the international border with Egypt, taking over from east to west in the north to protect the city of Ashkelon, and open and ongoing IDF operations all the time inside of Gaza, meaning continued Israeli military control, continuous military control by Israel inside of Gaza after this war is over. So that's the only way that we can dampen their support for jihad. And by the way, the data themselves also show this, because whereas 88% of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria support Hamas, only 60% of Gazans do. And the reason for that, again, is not difficult to discern. It's because the Gazans are the ones paying the price for what Hamas did on October 7th in Judea and Samaria. They still aren't paying the price. Right? There is no settler violence, right? It's gone down to basically nothing. The inter-civilian clashes between Palestinians and Israeli civilians in Judea and Samaria. So they're not paying a price in Judea and Samaria. And rather than acknowledge this, the Biden administration is telling itself and the world these lies about the Palestinians, these lies about the Jews of Israel, these lies about what it takes to make peace, such as it is between Palestinians and Israelis. And American policy on this is being directed by these fables. So I don't know what the Americans are going to do. I don't know how they're going to work this out. It would be great if the Republicans on the Hill would start exercising some significant oversight over what's happening and who's making policy. But all the same, Israel's policies, and by the way, our society as well, have to be directed by the data that we saw on October 7th and that came out of this Birzeit University poll. Our policies cannot be to lessen our military pressure in Gaza, not to go easy on a civilian population that supports jihad, that supports the slaughter of October 7th, that supports Hamas, that seeks Israel's annihilation. Israel has to exact a punishment for what they did, and we have to defeat Hamas, and we can't relent, because what we see is a society that's organized completely around the principle of annihilating Israel and the Jews, and they can't be given any sense of hope that they'll accomplish this aim at any time, anywhere, under any circumstances. So that's the in focus for today, and I'll be talking to a friend of mine who's now the operations officer for the Gaza division later this week to talk about what's actually going on the ground with our forces, with Hamas in Gaza. So talk to you guys soon. Take care.